What's up YouTube, Dale here from Zephyr, and today I am bringing you an update to the most recent TCG exclusive, and that is of course MimiGhouls. So MimiGhoul's got some amazing new support, none less so than this brand new giant MimiGhoul, which is absolutely insane because it does give a very nice aggressive punch to the deck as well, which is something of what it was missing from its wave 1. God, I can't wait until the OCG get TCG exclusives, because more times than not they do give them one card that kind of makes it all mesh and tick together. I'm not too sure what they could be giving this deck right now, but I just can't wait to see it and any more support that this deck does get. It's an incredibly fun deck and I really do enjoy its playstyle and the way that it works. So with all of that out of the way, please smash that like button, hit that notification bell and subscribe. If you get the video above 50 likes in the first 24 hours, I'll also bring you a dedicated combo video for the deck, and I'll also try and get some duels recorded at locals of it as well. So with all of that out of the way, let's dive head first into the profile, show you what we've got and explain why we've got it. So I'm starting off with the original MimiGhoul, so the first wave of support, playing triple Archfiend and triple Dragon. These, in my opinion, are still your best MimiGhoul monsters. So Dragon on normal or special, you get to add a MimiGhoul spell or trap from the deck to the hand, which is just insane in general. Its flip effect is, if it is the main phase, apply the effects in sequence. So you destroy all face-up monsters you control except MimiGhoul monsters, and then you give control of this card to your opponent. Now, for those of you that are new to the MimiGhoul art type, the whole idea is that you're supposed to give them to your opponent in face-down defense position, and then when they flip, they trigger their effects on your opponent's board, destroying the board, and then they come back to you as monster for material. It obviously has the exact same effect as most, if not all, of the MimiGhouls that have the ability to special summon themselves from the hand to your opponent's field in face-down defense position. Then Archfiend on the flip side has the flip effect, no pun intended, that your opponent draws one card and then you, the controller, sends one card. So basically if you give this to your opponent and you flip it face up, they will lose a card in their hand and you will draw a new card. Great success. The best thing about this one is during the main phase you get to special this card to the hand to the face down defense position to your opponent's field, but if it is normal or special you get to change a face up monster on the field to face down monster on the field to face out attack position, and then that or defense, and that's how you can then trigger the MimiGhouls that you give your opponent. So in an ideal scenario, what you're trying to do is you're trying to give your opponent some of the newer cards like Slime and Fairy, and then making them get flipped face up with your Archfiend. Dragon should more times than not be your main normal summon, but then you get the ability of getting cards like MimiMaker, which is just insane, which will then allow you to basically give your opponent an Archfiend, or that's the ideal scenario, is give your opponent an Archfiend, special an Archfiend from your hand, flip that Archfiend face up, you draw a card, they send a card, they're already starting to lose hand advantage. But with the brand new cards, MimiGhoul, Slime and Fairy, they just add a little bit more to the deck, which is absolutely insane. So Slime has the ability that if it's flipped during the main phase, your opponent can special summon a MimiGhoul monster from the deck. So keep it in mind, when it says your opponent, more times than not, you're flipping it up on your opponent's side of the field, meaning it is you, the MimiGhoul player, that is getting that bonus effect. So you get to special summon a MimiGhoul monster from the deck to your field, and then of course give control of this card to your opponent. So not only will you get to summon a MimiGhoul from the deck, but you also get to take the Slime back as well, and that's going to be instant rank 1 fodder for your giant MimiGhoul. This one has, during the main phase, you get to special summon this card from the hand to your opponent's field and face down defense, but if your opponent controls more monsters than you do, you can actually special summon it face up to your field, so you're just going to get a free extender. MimiGhoul Fairy is flip in the main phase, apply the effects in sequence. This turn you cannot activate effects of monsters special summoned from the hand. So again, if you were to give this to your opponent, you flip it face up during their turn, it comes back to you. It means that they can't bestial you. If you want to do it during your turn, they can't do it during their turn. And then of course it also means that any monster effects that they summon from the hand cannot activate their effect. So like Witch, for example. Then you, of course, you give control of it to your opponent. Back to ourselves. And then again, during the main phase, special it to your opponent's field in face down defense. Or, if you control a MimiGhoul monster, you get to special summon it from your hand. So, Fairy has the weird effect where it doesn't require your opponent to have more monsters than you do or anything like that. It's just as long as you control a MimiGhoul monster, which is really kind of cool. So this is the one that just lets you extend and extend, which the benefit of, unfortunately, if you do open up both fairies, you can almost summon down one fairy and then extend into another fairy. And then you're just trying to get into your giant MimiGhoul, which, as we'll explain later, is just insane because it searches you out any MimiGhoul card, which is crazy. So the reason I'm playing 2 and 2 of these is I'm still testing them out. If anything, I'm more tempted to be playing Slime at 3. And for the fact of the matter is, it's just like, if I give it to my opponent, I get the flip effect, great success. The extend effect is also doable because I give it to my opponent. Fairy is kind of relevant sometimes, but kind of flipping it during my turn isn't the most effective. Like, all it does is stop bestials, and I'm not really putting lights and darks in my graveyard for the bestials to be relevant, unless I put myself under shifter. So I kind of felt that of the two is the least relevant, but I feel that there's just so much consistency in the deck anyway that I was kind of happy with them at 2 and 2. That might be something that will change down the line. Then for the final MimiGhoul monsters before we get into the Master, we're playing the 1 Cerberus and the 1 Armor. So Cerberus is the flip effect that it allows you to banish the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck, of course, but it'll be technically saying your deck, being your opponent. And then you special on one of the banished monsters to your opponent's field, so our field, the MimiGhoul players, in defense position. And then of course you give control of it back to your opponent. It also has the additional effect that you special summon it to your opponent's field in face down defense like everything else, but you can only use each of the following effects once per turn. But the one benefit that this has is your opponent cannot target face up spells you control with card effects. So if you flip it during your opponent's turn and then it comes back to your board, it's just a nice little bit. Obviously if you have it in your turn as well, it does the exact same thing, but you're not really going to want to leave this on your board in defense. The idea is you flip it during your opponent's turn, you get an extender off of them, you can come back to your board, and if you want to, it just means it protects your dungeon and everything else. Armor is another one of the brand new cards, and I actually do really like the artwork of these. I like all the artworks of them because it kind of gives me like a D&D D&D feel. It's all about like chests that transform, and they're basically like gotcha monsters, which I think is really cool. Anyway, back to the irrelevance. This turn, MimiGhoul monsters cannot be destroyed by battle, so again, if it is flipped during the main phase. So the best thing is, you give this to your opponent, and then you flip it during their turn, and then it comes over to you. All of your MimiGhouls can't be destroyed by battle, which is great success. And of course, give control of it to your opponent. So the best thing about this is it just says MimiGhoul monsters cannot be destroyed by battle, so in a mirror match, that's going to suck. But in just this one, because it doesn't say MimiGhoul monsters you control, it means that when it flips on your opponent's side, it doesn't protect their monsters, it will come over to you, but it will protect all MimiGhoul monsters all round. Again, during the main phase, special it from your hand to your opponent's field in face down defense, or if your opponent controls a monster, you get special on it face up onto your field. So again, it has the same special summon requirements of slime, which is why Fairy is a little bit weird in the sense that it's the only one currently that has the ability to summon it to your field if you control MimiGhoul. Maybe it would have been too broken if all of these had the same effects, but again, it just acts as an extender if you can't. It's quite a nice scenario really, because it's like if you can't get MimiGhoul to your opponent's field, at least you can still extend if you control one. And the last one we're playing is the MimiGhoul Master. So this is the only one that is not a flip effect. So it can't be destroyed by battle or card effects while your opponent controls any face down monsters, or if you control a MimiGhoul monster other than itself. You can only use each of the following effects once per turn. If this card is normal or special, you add a MimiGhoul monster from the deck to the hand, except itself. And then during your opponent's main phase, quick effect, change a face down monster on the field to face out attack position. The best thing is that this works out incredibly well with its treasure chest, I suppose is the right word, counterpart, and that is of course MimiGhoul Throne. So we'll talk about this a little bit later on, but the idea is that you can get Throne to summon out your master, and then you can equip Throne to master, making it a 2800 mini boss monster, and then it'll also have a quick effect to bounce a card as well, so really good success, but Giant MimiGhoul still takes the cake. Moving on to the MimiGhoul spells, of course, we are playing triple MimiGhoul Maker. So this one lets you reveal 2 flip monsters with different names from the deck. Your opponent randomly picks one for you to special summon to their field, and then you can special summon any MimiGhoul monster from your hand. So the best thing about that is you don't need to special summon the one you add, but I do find it sometimes that if I've already got an Archfiend in my hand, and then I add another Archfiend, it just increases my chances of being able to summon an Archfiend from my hand to flip one of the MimiGhouls I've given my opponent, triggering their effects, which comes down relevant later on with thrusts and talents, but it just gives you a little bit more. On top of that as well, there's a secondary effect that a lot of people forget about, which is really, really important. So if your opponent special summons a monster or monsters except during a damage step, you get to banish this card from the graveyard, target a face down monster your opponent controls, and change it to face out attack or defense. But you can only use one MimiGhoul Maker effect per turn, but the other is you're going to use a second effect during your opponent's turn. And the reason that's relevant is there'll be times when you might want to lock your opponent with a face down monster, or if you activate something like MimiGhoul Room, you give your opponent a dragon, and then of course you use Maker to flip that dragon face out, and then dragon will just nuke their entire board. So it's kind of like a one-sided, or like a Regeki during your opponent's turn, which is really funny because then you get dragon. And then of course, moving on to probably the most expensive card of the MimiGhoul art type right now is MimiGhoul Dungeon. So MimiGhoul monsters you control that were not normal or special this turn gain attack equal to their defense. As you see from their stats, they're all relatively defense heavy. And then on top of that as well, any player who controls a face-down monster cannot normal summon monsters nor declare an attack with monsters that were special summoned this turn. During your main phase, you get to add a MimiGhoul monster from your deck or graveyard to your hand. So again, it just gives you recurrence from the graveyard, and the idea is that if you're giving your opponent a MimiGhoul, you put them in a position, and ideally this is why you want to leave them with Archfiend during the end of the turn, not something like Dragon, because they'll just flip Dragon, it won't destroy anything, and then it'll come back to your board. Whereas if you give them Archfiend, they then have to put themselves in a position of, well, if I flip Archfiend, or if I flip Slime, for example, or even if I flip Fairy, I can't activate monster effects in the hand. Either I flip Armor, and then my MimiGhoul monsters that are on my opponent's field can't be destroyed by battle, which is just as annoying. If I flip Archfiend, I lose a card in my hand and my opponent draws a card. Like, there's just so much that you kind of really stick your opponent with, which is why MimiGhoul Room, which we'll talk about in a second, is really, really kind of cool. And that's why Dungeon is probably like one of your go-to cards for the deck. So it's more times than not off of Dragon, you're either going for a Dungeon or you're going to be going for the Maker. And that's just really how it's going to help you get that little bit further, depending on what you've opened up with. So really, really cool card. You've got to remember that it locks you down if you have a face-down monster. But more times than not, unless you've been forced to activate something like Book of Eclipse, which I'll talk about a little bit later on, you shouldn't really have a face-down monster on your field. And then a card that I'm not completely set on, but I do think is really, really funny, is MimiGhoul Fork. So I'm playing 2 of this, and this one lets you target a face-down monster your opponent controls. Your opponent gets to choose one of the following effects, and then you apply the effect. So either you change that card to face out attack or defense, which means if you give them a MimiGhoul monster and you hard open up Fork, you then force an Archfiend to be flipped, which again triggers Thrust and Talent. So it's one of the ones where it's like, well, do I flip this card, lose a card from my hand, let my opponent draw a card, and then possibly give them the ability of Thrust or Talents in me, or how do I want it to resolve? The second effect is they send it to the graveyard so it doesn't get its flip effect, but the owner of the card, which will be you, the MimiGhoul player, will draw 2 new cards. So it's like its own little pot of greed. And if that wasn't enough, you get to banish this card from the graveyard to add another MimiGhoul Fork from the deck to the hand. But you can only use each effect once per turn, which is why you play 2. Because the other is you activate the first one, you banish it, you grab a second one, and then you go again the next turn. It's something that I'm trialing out. I don't think it's absolutely necessary. Quite like something like MimiGhoul Charm that I feel more so MimiGhoul Charm could be in the side deck than in the main deck. But I do feel that it's kind of an interesting card. But I can see myself cutting it without really worrying about what it's going to change to the deck. And then MimiGhoul Charm. I'm happy this got a secret because I think it looks the most colourful, but I also feel that if you were to give a secret to the best cards in the deck, you could probably have given the secret to maybe something like Slime or Fairy, but then I'm happy you don't because then you'd need to play Slime and Fairy at 2 or 3. Regardless, I digress. So this one is, once per chain during the main phase, if a MimiGhoul monster your opponent controls is flipped face up, you randomly choose a face down card in your opponent's extra deck, and if it is a monster that can be special summoned, you special summon it to your field, but it cannot activate its effects this turn. If it wasn't a card that could be special summoned, you banish it, but you can use this effect twice per turn. So I feel that this is predominantly a go first card. Like going second, I don't see what advantage it gives you because I feel that your opponent really already sets up their board, and because you're ripping randomly, there are a time where I've seen someone rip a Promethean Princess and then they firelock themselves. Big ups. But I feel going first, the idea is that you should be able to trigger the MimiGhouls twice, which means you're randomly ripping 2 from your opponent's extra deck. And then during your opponent's turn, you have the ability to flip 1 MimiGhoul, if not 2, depending on what you've left them with. And that will let you rip their extra deck again 2 more times. Not to mention, if you combo this off with Nightmare Unicorn, you're going to be ripping their extra deck for a total of like 6 cards, just on your first turn 3 times and then your opponent's turn 3 times, which can be massively damaging, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary, which is why it's a card that I could highly see myself siding out and then siding in when I know I'm going to be going first. The last of the MimiGhoul cards we are playing is 2 MimiGhoul Room. I know, again, you could probably play this at 3, but I feel it's the exact same scenario that if I open up multiples of these, it's not that helpful for me. I feel that people are able to play around a face-down card a lot more, and if it's just MimiGhoul Room on its own, again, if I was to just go, cool, my hand isn't that great, set MimiGhoul Room, pass, activate MimiGhoul Room, hope they don't have an Ash Blossom, and if it does resolve and give them a MimiGhoul monster, they're probably going to be in a position where they can already OTK me. So again, I feel that this card is a more predominant go first card. It's one of them ones where you want to be able to go off full combo, get access to dungeons, set MimiGhoul Room, activate MimiGhoul Room when they try to break out of the lock that dungeon is going to put them under, and then you give them another face down monster where they're like, crap. And then you want to be able to control when that face down monster gets flipped face off with something like your MimiMaster, which will then nuke the entire board, and then you don't have to worry that they then get their normal summon back. Which is why I've gone with 2, because it's just so much more easily searchable now. We've got so many more MimiGhoul cards and spells and traps that Dragon can pick out that they can just lead from one to the other. You've got more successful chance of opening up what you might need and then go, okay, let's add a room, or I've already opened up a room, let's add something else. Speaking of which, we've got the Kashtira package. Now, I know not a lot of people are absolutely happy about the Kashtira package in this deck. I understand it. I just feel that it adds too much to the deck. It's just such a good powerhouse going second. Like, to be able to go, cool, special summon down Unicorn's effect to try and search out Cashteriosis or Birth, and then they have to be forced to try and interact with it. And it's at that point where you go, okay, well, if you don't interact with it, I'm going to be able to go a little bit further. I can get access to a Fenrir. I don't mind XYZ locking myself, depending on the particular version that you're going down. And then straight away, you've got two very powerful boss monsters on the board that as soon as they activate with or interact with a monster effect, you're going to go, cool, rip a card from the extra deck, or cool, banish a face up card face down. So I just feel that it's just such an incredibly powerhouse engine in the deck that it's insane not to play it. But I do fully understand if people don't want to play it because they just hate Kashtiras because of like PTSD from playing the Kashtira format. Understand it completely, but I feel that if you want this deck to be the best it possibly can be, you're probably going to want to be playing this. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be comboing off your Unicorn with your Birth and your Theosis. I know some people don't play the Theosis and some people don't even play the Fenrir. Absolutely fine. But I just quite like the idea of, okay, Unicorn, if I've already hard opened the Birth, I can go for Theosis, activate Theosis, get a Fenrir. And that's just two damaging monsters that I'm happy to leave on my board. Because it's straight away, if my opponent activates a monster effect, or of course I activate a MimiGhoul monster effect, I get to start clearing some of their cards off. Birth just is what it is. A lot of people forget that when they activate a spell, you get to banish 3 cards from their graveyard face down, which again can be insanely powerful, especially with formats and decks that want to put loads of cards in their graveyard to then be utilized for later on grind games. So you'll just be able to pick them apart bit by bit. Not to mention that as soon as you link off Kashtira Unicorn, you're then going to go, cool, Birth, bring it back. If you hard open up a Fenrir, you're going to go, cool, normal summon down a Fenrir. You've got loads of different options on this one, and the ability of Fenrir search into Unicorn, hard open up Birth, activate Birth, summon down Unicorn, activate Theosis, or sorry, search out Theosis, can be useful, even though you've already got the Fenrir on the board. But the idea is that there are just different routes you could take with it, and it's something that I'm testing out. But I can arguably see if you wanted to cut the engine down to the base minimum, you'd go for something like this, and then you'd definitely be playing the Precious Planet Rice off as well. But this is the kind of engine lineup that I'm going with at this moment in time, and it might change as time goes on. Speaking of which, because both of the field spells are quite important, or mainly your dungeon is your ideal one you want to go to, you've got Terraforming, which is also a great target off of the back of Triple Tactics Thrust. Now, this is obviously one of the cards that straight away makes people go, oh, nah, but what I love about this deck is the exact same reason that I love Dark World so much, is Dark World allows you to abuse a card like this because you control when your opponent activates a monster, and then you also get to control if your opponent has a monster, so you can add a card rather than setting a card. Not to mention, if you set a card, you're going to be going directly for your MimiGhoul room, but if you're going to be adding a card, you've got ways to accessing Terraforming, Theosis, Triple Tactics Talents. You've got loads of different options you can go for, and then when you bring in the side deck, you just have more access to board breakers. It's just crazy. So 2 Thrust and 2 Talents, like giving your opponent a MimiGhoul and then flipping it face up, make it, the fact that when you flip out a MimiGhoul, it means your opponent is activated, is just crazy, and yeah, it just works out so well. And then the penultimate cards that we're playing is Triple D-Shifter. I just went with, like, the deck can function under D-Shifter, and unfortunately we are in a format where some of the best decks can't, some of the best decks can. And it's one of the easiest ones that it's like, right, okay, well, if the deck can function under Shifter, play it, or side it out, and if it can't, then of course you might be an auto win button. So it's one of them ones, if you hard open up a Shifter against a deck that can't play Shifter, you drop that on them, they're in trouble. If you drop it on them and they're like, yeah, I can play through Shifter, then straight away you've got the easiest free side out card you could possibly want. And the last 3 cards, I'm kind of torn right now whether I want to be playing Book of Eclipse or if I want to be playing Book of Moon. Now, the reason I went with Eclipse is just for that ability that it flips multiple monsters face down, not just one. I like the idea of activating Book of Eclipse during my opponent's turn. If they try and flip one of my MimiGhoul monsters and then it comes back over to me and they're like, right, cool, I'm now out of the normal summon lock. Of course, as soon as they put a monster on the board, I can Book of Eclipse it, put it down, and then it stops their XYZ plays, it stops their Link plays, it stops their Synchro plays. The only thing it doesn't stop is Fusion plays. On top of that as well, it's a good board breaking option because of that non-target ability. You draw this, activate this during the draw phase, and then straight away your opponent is forced to interact with it unless they've just got a full board of Link monsters. The other option is something like Book of Moon, and I feel that Book of Moon is going to give you a bit more of a benefit because, like I said previously, you don't really want to be flipping up the MimiGhouls, because if you flip up the MimiGhouls on your board, you're just going to give your opponent all the advantage, which does get very, very tricky. So you have to be very careful when you do that. And again, that's where Giant MimiGhoul Master can come into play, because that will help you actually pop cards as well. So there's a lot of things you need to consider, which is why I'm not 100% set on Book of Eclipse, but I am considering between Eclipse and Book of Moon. I feel that Book of Moon might be a little bit more controlled. It'll just come down to the format that we're in, whether we are going to be going down a route where loads of monsters just can't be targeted by card effects, and then maybe Book of Moon isn't so effective. It's something that you could probably take out. It's definitely something you could look at playing maybe Dominus Impulse if you wanted to. Sorry, Dominus Purge. Impulse is the worst one for this deck because Impulse actually stops you, which is really, really funny. So for those of you that don't know, if your opponent actually is playing Dominus Impulse and they activate it during from their hand, it means that like when you flip up the MimiGhouls, it no longer activates their effects, which is like the biggest counter to the MimiGhoul deck. Really, really funny. But the idea is your Book of Eclipses can become Ash Blossoms, they can become Imperms, they can come pretty much whatever you want. So moving on to the extra deck, of course, we've got 2 of the brand new Giant MimiGhoul. This card is an insane addition to the deck. Looks incredible as well. It's generic rank 1. Your non-XYZ MimiGhoul monsters can attack directly while your opponent controls a face-down monster, so kind of giving Toon vibes on that one as well, which is really cool. You can only use each of the following effects once per turn. If it's XYZ summons, you get to add a MimiGhoul card from the deck to the hand. You can also detach material from this card to then target face-up cards on the field up to the number of face-down monsters your opponent controls and destroy them. And then if you do, you inflict 1,000 damage to your opponent for each card destroyed, which is just wild. And then we've got 2 MimiGhoul Throne. Now, you don't have to play 2. You can actually flex this around a little bit if you want to. But the idea behind this is it just gives you a little bit more for the grind game if you want to utilize Master a little bit more. So this one, unfortunately, isn't generic rank 1. It does require specifically 2 MimiGhouls. But you get to detach material from this card to special summon a MimiGhoul Master from your hand, deck, or graveyard. And then during the main phase, you get a quick effect to target a MimiGhoul Master you control. And then you equip this card to it as an equipped spell that gives it 1,000 attack. Then you can return cards on the field up to the number of materials this card had. So more times than not, you might be detaching the material to summon out the Master, but then you're going to be quick effect putting it in, and you're going to be able to bounce 1. However, if you already have a Master in play, what you're going to do is during the turn is you're going to equip the Throne to it, and then you just get to bounce 2 instead. Unfortunately, you can only use 1 effect per turn, so it means you can't revive and then bounce, but it's one of the ones that you either revive during your turn or summon during your turn, equip during your opponent's turn, bounce during your opponent's turn, or if you've already got the Master on the board, you make this with 2 MimiGhouls, effect to equip it, and then non-target bounce 2, which is really, really important. Then moving on to the generics, of course, we do play number 13, Embodiment of Crime, and number 31. God, these cards need a reprint. And then moving on to the other, let's do the other rank 1s before I do the rank 7s. So for the other rank 1s, we've got the Fuko. This is mainly in here for the Tenpai matchup because this card just becomes a mini towers. It just can't be outed. So unaffected by other card effects. As a quick effect, you get to detach 2 materials from this card. For the rest of the turn, it cannot be destroyed by battle, and you take no battle damage from it involving this card. So it just sits there, and your opponent's like, yeah, can't get rid of that now. Great. You've got your Assembled Nightingale, which basically just allows you to attack directly for you to very easily go cool, Downward, and then Zeus. And then the penultimate XYZ you play is the one Big Eye because of the Cash tier package. Just the idea of going Cash, steal an opponent's monster, use it as Link fodder, go from there. Or even use it as XYZ fodder for your Star Slayer Typhon. Then, of course, for the Link monsters, we've got the 1 Relinquish Anima. You're only playing level 1s anyway in your main deck, apart from the Cash tiers. And then, of course, you've got your IP, which is only ever going to go into SP. If you don't own an SP, go for something like Nightmare Unicorn. You're getting not the exact same outcome or the exact same effect, but you're getting the ability to use that effect of IP, go into another monster, and then clear off a card your opponent controls. And that's kind of the budget option to SP, when SP is still like 40 quid, and then a Unicorn is like £1, so, or maybe less. And that is it for the MimiGhoul profile. So, like I said, there's a couple of different cards that I want to be testing out on this. There's a couple of different cards that I want to be trialing out, whether I like them or not, what ratios I want to play around with, how I kind of want the deck to function and operate. But overall, I think it's just a really, really fun deck to play. It's probably not a fun deck to be on the receiving end of more times than not, but I feel that it can do some really good things. And like I said, what I love about TCG exclusives that are playable once you get them is majority of TCG exclusives are just fun. Like Mutants were really fun, they just weren't to the competitive level. Chistinas could also be quite fun as well, but I feel MimiGhoul is one of the ones that's a little bit more in the spotlight. More people know about it, more people think that it's good, more people think that it's functional. They usually, when the OCG get them, they usually add a card to the deck that makes them go, whoa, that's actually now incredibly insane. When you look at, well, this is looking back now, but you got Double Agent, you got Beatrice. Dangers were pretty much perfect. Like, you couldn't really give them anything from the OCG that the TCG hadn't already given them. So we might be in that scenario with the MimiGhouls right now, but only time will tell. This deck will either get massively better from the OCG or it will stay as it is. But if it stays as it is, I still think it's an incredibly fun deck to play. You can pick it up relatively cheaply. Like, I think the original stuff was like 35 quid. That's definitely gone up because of the MimiGhoul Dungeon and the second wave of support. But if you're able to get into this early enough, you should have a deck to rock and roll with, basically. And as you've seen through this, we're pretty much on like 50 to 60% MimiGhouls. So straight away, there's not a lot of space left for them to add more MimiGhoul cards into it. And I feel that Dragon and Archfiend are like ideal. I don't see how you can power creep those. And I feel that Giant MimiGhoul again is pretty much ideal. I don't see how you power creep that card. I feel the only thing that the deck really needs is probably a spell card or just a monster card that allows you to flip a monster face down during your opponent's turn. Like, give them their own Book of Moon, and then that's when the deck becomes really cracked, because that's when your opponent goes, aha, I flipped this MimiGhoul monster, and I've also activated Impulse, so it's not going to come back to you, and I'm out of the dungeon lock, and you go, okay, activate this card, flip it face down. Like, that's kind of what you want. You just want something a little bit more consistent than Book of Moon, which you unfortunately can't search as it is quick play. Anyway, I've gone on long enough. That is it for the MimiGhoul profile. Any questions at all, by all means, please let me know in the comments down below. I'll be more than happy to answer them. I hope I've gone into as much depth as possible, giving you an explanation and a breakdown of the deck, the cards, and everything else in between, so that you have as much information as possible to kind of get your head around the deck, decide if you want to build it, test it out online, you name it. Like I said, and I can't say this enough, the deck is incredibly fun to play. Like I said, it gives you D&D kind of theme to it, with a little bit of Toons as well. It's kind of like Toons and D&D kind of merged together. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, the whole 9 yards. Until next time, as absolutely always, stay safe, and of course, happy dueling.